Okay, take 17 or whatever this is. Okay, so the aim of the lesson is to raise students' awareness of intonation and word sentence stress, to teach one super segmental element of these advice structures, and to get students to notice that particularly the tonic syllable or the peak vowel, which has, as Gilbert calls it, has peak meaning, and to get across that this is the part with the syllable that contains new information in this proclaiming tone. So the rationale. Um, it's a post-listening exercise, but we'll talk about that later. Students are likely to hear the sound contrast. It's a teachable element. Um, uh, we're choosing just one element because, as Gilbert says, it's important to keep the load light for students. And so, for instance, I'm avoiding the onset syllable. This stress would be for maybe another lesson. I mean, there are lots of elements in each of these sentences about intonation or assimilation, elision, ellipsis. I can't do them all, so one single element. And as Gilbert says, we may hear this intonation and this different stress, but it's important to call this to the student's consciousness so they're aware of the significance and that this stress contains meaning. I have an Arabic, Chinese, and Spanish class. Arabic speakers tend to overly exhibit the downward tones and need to learn to modulate from down to up. Particularly when giving advice, this downward tone can sound disinterested, not to say rude, so it's useful for them. Chinese is a tonal language, and so they tend to have, Chinese students have fixed tones, and so they need to become more flexible with their tone. Spanish students, well, it's a syllable timed language, so where they can recognize stress within a word because they have the accent, they find it more difficult to recognize stress and use stress at a sentence level. Another idea, well, another reason I like this is that if this idea that Gilbert has of a template sentence, and I think this might be a way to introduce this. If we take the sentence, if I were you, I'd avoid fast food. I didn't stress it very well there, but there is so much in this sentence that we could start with. So just by the sound and singing it, she has this idea of a song. So fast food, that stress, but also this if I were you, the if I were, the schwa, the ad, fast food, not fast food. So there's all kinds of things in that one sentence which I think I'd like to use. Certainly have that idea anyway of using a template sentence. So the staging, as I said, is this would be a post-listening exercise. So a lot of the vocabulary around healthy eating versus unhealthy eating, a lot of that's been given, and it's a listening exercise, so they're all hopefully already had this stress. Anyway, so the first thing would be students would go back to the audio script and find the 5 examples, or the 3 examples, let's say 5 examples of advice that were in there. They would underline them, and these advice structures would be boarded. So students would then be able to ask to recognize the new information being given in, and it's usually going to be at the end of the sentence. So it's the peak of meaning, as Gilbert calls it. These will be highlighted on the board as the teacher elicits this information. So what's the new information in the sentence? It's become a vegetarian, fast food. They're already stressing it as they respond to the answer. So we're already getting this sound of a stress. Um, the stress words will be highlighted on the board as we go. And then so the teacher can exaggerate the stress as it is elicited in the one answers, and then we can go back to the audio. So we'll go back to the audio, and we'll notice the stress of the tonic syllable, and that it is indeed containing new information. Um, so these sentences then will be chorally drilled. Chorally because it affects, it stimulates the long-term memory. They will be asked to, as we chorally drill the sentences, asked to articulate stress by lifting their hands up. This is activating the physical memory. And also They're best chorally dressed and not individually because the class offers some kind of support to that. I've asked my classes about drilling and they say they rather like it, but when I've asked them to drill on their own and individual, they feel put upon or exposed. So I rarely do individual, and we do it in groups or small groups or as a whole class. And then the whole thing can be chorally backchained because we are working from the stress right at the back of the sentence, so we can backchain it using the stress and then going back so they have a real sense of that difference. Then something more productive, the teacher will hand out three dilemmas to each student, and then they mingle and they've got to find advice for the dilemma. So your dilemma might be, I have a sore tooth, and then you have to go around and find the advice. Students will be specifically asked to give very bad advice. I've kind of taken this from um, contradict me from the pronunciation games, but I've used obviously advice. So the students go around, they mingle, they get three pieces of advice. It's terrible advice. They sit in pairs and they share that advice. And hopefully, it should sound ridiculous. And maybe student B who's listening might say, well, no, if you have a sore tooth, you don't go to a football match stressed. You go to the dentist, and maybe we start to get the um, initial initial stress as they speak to each other. I mean, the legitimate advice should be quite obvious. Um, so teacher nominates and corrects and corrects the advice and highlights the stress. So for instance, the teacher says, Guillaume, what was your dilemma? I have a toothache. And what was the suggestion to go to a football match? And then the teacher models. So you don't need a dentist, you need a doctor. Or you don't need a football match, you need a dentist, that kind of thing. And so and I think as the students kind of respond to this, the advice is so bad and the answer is so obvious that I think we'd start to get it. And there's an opportunity there to chorally drill some of the more interesting answers. So, and students will go back in pairs and give their improved advice to each other. So, Marcos' problem is his window in his house is broken, and the advice would be to go to the sailor. And of course, the student B would say, you don't need a sailor, you need a builder. And we start, and the teacher can go around and monitor and listen for that piece of stress. Uh, and then to finish off, students will be asked to come up with three dilemmas from their own life, and these could be complete fictional, um, and they will mingle to get proper advice to go around, and maybe we can elicit those kind of discussions again. So you don't need this, you need that. Maybe they'll get good advice. And so that it's probably more to do with their own world, although possibly they're not using genuine problems or genuine dilemmas. I think that's it. Okay.